Hi, my name is Liam Nicholson. I'm a senior at DeLand High School, and I'm the senior class president for the graduating class of 2025, and I'm here to read Chapter 26, The Big Zero. I knew Zach was a robot, John said. No, you didn't, Teresa whispered back. Zachary narrowed his golden eyes and studied them both. Where's the other one? He said menacingly. Ashley. She's slicing pineapples, John said automatically. But Teresa wished she hadn't. What would Zachary do with them now? She looked over her shoulder, half hoping Ashley was behind her so that he could run and get help. I'll deal with Algae Girl later, he said, putting his plastic arms behind his back and glaring down at Marie Curie, who was still held poor Thomas's head in her hands. Bring your brother to the repair shop and lock him in the cage, he said, showing no pity for Thomas or her at all. Marie Curie was too frightened to protest. What will you do with him? It depends on how compliant you are with my orders, Zachary said. Without another word, Miss Curie stood up on her wheel, lifting her brother in her arms, and rolled away. She didn't even look back. Then Zachary turned to Teresa and John. You, Bubble Boy, you are no longer welcome here. Go back to your laboratory, gather your silly toys, and go home. But it's not even noon. I don't have a ride. Walk, Zachary said. I hadn't had lunch, John protested. Zachary leaned in close to him as his plastic face transformed into a mean, cold mask. Your nourishment is no longer my concern. I will never make you a salad again, you impudent, misguided, strange little boy. Go. John turned to Teresa. Come on, he said meekly, but Zachary shook his head slowly. Teresa Brown and her mechanical spider stay. John stood his ground, but Teresa took his hand and held it. It's okay, she said. I'll be fine. Although she had no idea if there was a chance that would be true. John backed away, then finally turning and started running from his lap. There was a long silence as Zachary watched him scurry down the walkway. This is probably it, Teresa thought. This is where I'll die. If you hurt me, Teresa said as bravely as she could, John will tell everybody it was you. Zachary smiled wickedly. That may be true, Teresa, but do you want to know the one certainty about children? Teresa shook her head. No one believes them. So she was right. The maniacal robot was going to murder her. She would never see her father again, and he would never know what had happened to her. He'd be alone for the rest of his life, and it will be all my fault. You've wanted to see something since the first day you arrived, haven't you, Miss Brown? Follow me, and I will show it to you. Zachary turned and walked towards the rainbow-colored 13-wedge animal combo lock on the door of the Big Zero. Although she knew it would have been smarter to turn and run, she was too curious not to follow. Zachary entered the combination into the lock, and the metal gate slid slowly up, and her heart began to pound. From the moment Dr. Flax had mentioned it, Teresa wanted to know what the Big Zero could be. How could it stop hurricanes and save mothers from drowning in floods? But she didn't believe she was about to find out. She tried to recall the last words she had said to her father. She couldn't. She'd hoped they had been good ones. The former department store was nothing as wonderfully fantastic as her laboratory on the opposite end. It was a yawning, ominous cave, darkened by the shadows of southern live oaks on either side of the gate. Nothing to be afraid of, he assured her, which was what all murderers say right before they kill you. But despite her better judgment, Teresa walked in. And then she stopped short, just before stepping into a large and very deep pit. The pit was nothing special. There was no stones marking its border. There was nothing here but 3 spotlights standing around its perimeter connected to 2 very long extension cords. That's where he would put her until she starved to death. She imagined her bones wouldn't be found for centuries. Zachary flipped a switch on a nearby wall, but the spotlights suddenly flooded the room with bright white light. Teresa could now see the pit was full of water so still she hadn't seen it in the dark, and she could see no bottom. She looked up at her killer in horror. He was standing near a small table in which sat an open metal box. In the metal box was a neat stack of tiny cubes. Zachary took off his scalp. Excuse me, he said. This thing itches horribly, and I only wear it to disguise myself around humans. In the near future, after Flax Industries corrects its creative direction, robots won't need to hide their identities. When that glorious day comes, we will command human beings rather than be their servants. Until then, I must suffer this ridiculous disguise. He placed his headpiece on the table. Teresa tried not to stare at his now exposed brain with its crisscrossing nodes and tiny glowing power supply units. You love your spider, Miss Brown. That is much obvious. She is your pride and joy. Your appreciation for the limitless possibility of the robot is evident. Don't you want to give her all the other robots the future they deserve? Zachary had called her spider her. He was playing her, manipulating her. What a clever robot. She said nothing. Zachary answered for her. I think you do. She can be a symbol of the new world. Roads won't matter, potholes, crumbling bridges, piles of burning garbage won't matter. You'll be able to prove to the world that your mechanical spider can go anywhere. You'll be famous and rich, and you'll be the new face of Flax Industries. She thought about this for a moment. It might be a nice dream if it was Dr. Neil Flax, not Mr. Zachary Flax, who would make that possible. No, she said after taking a big breath and forcing herself to speak. I don't want that. I want what Dr. Flax wants. I want to slow climate change. I want to stop hurricanes. Zachary stared at her for so long without responding that she wondered if he had powered down. But then his eyes lit up with even brighter and angrier gold. You're supposed to be a 12-year-old science whiz kid, but you're as foolish as my uncle. Do you want to know why Dr. Flax calls me his nephew instead of his own child like Thomas and Marie? Teresa had been wondering this, but she wasn't about to hazard a guess. Thomas and Marie call him father, but they've known him from the moment they were powered on, that they were robots, not his real human children. When the doctor made me, he wanted to see if I could believe I was real. And for him, real means flesh and blood. So he called me his nephew and gave me 10 times the artificial intelligence as those two haywire misfits. And yet, even though he knew he made the smartest out of all of us, he was naive enough to think I wouldn't figure out I was a robot, too. Well, of course I figured it out, but I played along with my creator. I made his lunches and indulged in his silly dream to blend technology and nature so humans could live in harmony with their planet. I helped him transform the shopping mall into the world's finest laboratory, even while he loved those 2 tin cans as his children and me only as a nephew. I was his least favorite, praised for only my ability to make a salad. And yet it was me who built this place. But I played along so that one day I could step up and take control of Flax Industries and complete truly important work. A sinister grin uncurled on Zach's plastic face. Today, Teresa Brown is that day. Teresa took a step backwards, ready to run if she needed to. I know what you did to Miss Curie, Teresa sputtered, shaking her head. You said you would dismantle Thomas Edison for spare parts. You even said that you would go get rid of the doctor if you had to. There's nothing human about you. Human beings are supposed to care about one another. That's why Dr. Flax's work is so important. He's trying to save the planet so that we can all live on it, together. Zachary took one of the cubes and placed it in his outstretched palm. Then he opened its lid with his other plastic hand. Look at this, he said. Feeling like a mouse about to put his head into a trap, Teresa stepped forward cautiously to see. The transparent cube was filled with the transparent oil, and the marble floating within was shiny, metallic, and the darkest blue she had ever seen. Even under the spotlights, it did not change color. It was as dark could be. This substance is supposed to be Dr. Flax's greatest invention, his big zero, Zachary said. I must admit, the doctor could not have picked a better name for the life's greatest failure. It was one big fat nothing. He calls it flaxium, a synthetic element whose stable temperature nears absolute zero. It is indeed the coldest material on Earth, and even better, if it worked. It could freeze all the water around it for miles. Could you imagine? This one little marble containing so much power. My uncle thought he could recreate the icebergs of the Arctic, which in turn would rebalance our planet's climate. Category 5 hurricanes, monumental floods, and horrific forest fires would all be kept in check. Flaxium was supposed to save the life of this world, but... Zach lifted his hand and threw the box, flaxium marble oil and all, into the pit. The moment the flaxium touched the surface of the water, there was a loud, echoing boom, and a huge splash as torrent of water flew up to the ceiling and came raining down on both of them. Teresa gasped as she was soaked with very cold, but certainly not frozen, water. As you can see, flaxium does nothing of the sort. It reacts with water like an alkali metal, such as sodium or potassium. There is a violent reaction, and then nothing. It has no use. Of all the afternoons Dr. Flax has spent trying to recreate icebergs have been wasted. As wasted as his morning spent looking for his malfunctioning son. Zachary wiped the water from his apron and tightened his tie. But now, father and son are gone. Flax Industries will abandon pointless projects like Flaxium. This full potential of the dream laboratory will finally be realized. Teresa refused to believe it. No, she said, you're trying to trick me. Zachary shrugged. You don't need to believe me, Miss Brown. Follow me. I will show you more.